Hi everybody, Gene here. Welcome to the Tapping Q&A podcast, where every single week we answer the most common and uncommon questions about tapping and EFT so that you can move past the basic recipe to master the art of delivery. You learn how to find root causes faster, clear issues quicker, and have longer lasting results with your tapping. And before we jump into today's show, I just wanted to remind you that I've started a new program called Art of Delivery Monthly, where every single month I'm going to teach you a new tool or technique that you can apply to your tapping. You get a chance to experience that firsthand inside of the training. You get a chance to ask questions about that. Then, after we've completed the content for the month, you'll get an opportunity to ask me anything at all about tapping and how to get more out of it. And finally, we'll end every single session with a tapping jam where you bring up topics and we'll tap as a group and do borrowing benefits. So you get the opportunity to learn, you get an opportunity to experience, you get a chance to have your knowledge deepened, and then an opportunity to clear whatever you're carrying with you that day. They happen the second week every single month, Tuesday 8 p.m. Eastern, Sunday 12 noon Eastern, so you can access them from all over the world. For more information and to sign up, all you need to do is go to masteringtheartofdelivery.com. That's masteringtheartofdelivery.com. This is Gene Montrestoli, and welcome to the Tapping Q&A podcast, recorded live to tape from Williamsburg in Brooklyn. This is episode 492, originally aired December 16th, 2020. Hi, everyone. I hope this finds you well wherever you are and whatever time of day you're getting a chance to listen to us. Thanks for spending a little time with me today. Today, we are going to talk about what goal or intention you can have with tapping so you get the most out of that tapping. Before we do that, just a quick reminder, we have a free 10-part guide on how you can use tapping to eliminate self-sabotage. All you need to do is go to tappingqa.com, click on the big blue button. If you happen to be on the website right now listening to the show, up in the upper right-hand corner at the top of the column, if you click on the blue button, you'll get an opportunity to download that guide absolutely free. The inspiration for the conversation that we're having today came from an interview I did with Rick Wilkes. Rick has been a guest on the podcast many times. He was actually the very, very, very first guest I had on the show 12 years ago and has become a very dear friend over the years and is a really thoughtful person. I was interviewing Rick for a special secret project that you're going to get a chance to have access to in the middle of January. And we were having a conversation about something completely different, but he made a comment that changed my mind. And it's something that I have been a little vocal about for a very long time, and he changed my mind. I didn't get a chance to mention it in the flow of the conversation we were having. I mentioned it to him after the fact, but I thought it'd be a great podcast topic because I didn't get a chance to wrestle with it there. And the thing that Rick changed my mind about was my relationship to Gary Craig's original title, Emotional Freedom Technique. For those of you who are newish, and at this point, newish could be the last 5 or 7 years to tapping, you might not recognize the history of tapping. The short history of tapping is tapping originated in applied kinesthesiology a little bit. Then Roger Callahan created something called thought field therapy, where it was a tapping algorithm, but every single topic had its own way of tapping, meaning that you tapped in different orders: eyebrow, chin, under the arm, collarbone, or under the nose, side of the eyebrow, top of the head. And he had a bunch of recipes that were pre-written for certain issues, or you could muscle test your way to it. And a number of Roger's students wanted to come up with a single algorithm, meaning we tap in one way, and if we tap in one way, we can do it for all issues. And Gary Craig created the one that became the most popular. There were a number of them that came out of Roger's work and his students, and Gary called it Emotional Freedom Technique. And if you have experienced tapping and you have been very, very emotional, on some level, that name makes sense. You're becoming free of this emotional experience. For a long time, I had two problems with this particular name. The first problem was calling something Emotional Freedom Technique is speaking in post-transformational language, meaning after I've had the transformation, I'm describing what is going on. And for the people who have had the experience with that thing, if you're using post-transformational language, it makes perfect sense. But for the people who haven't experienced it, post-transformational language doesn't make sense at all. And I'll give you a very odd example of this particular phenomenon. For the last 25 years, myself and a buddy of mine have combined juggling, sketch comedy, drama, storytelling, and we travel all over the U.S. and Canada working with high school and middle school kids. And we do drama and sketch comedy, and we do a lot of juggling. And if someone said, hey, we're going to see a juggler tonight, more than likely, one of the images that comes to your mind is a birthday party clown. Now, the style and approach that Brad and I use in our juggling is far from that. It's much more of a street performer show. It's definitely for an older audience. It's funny. It works. After you see us and you had a really good time, you're like, oh my gosh, you're not going to believe it. They were jugglers. And in both of those descriptions, I'm going to see a juggler and they were jugglers. You're using the exact same word, but in your mind, because you've experienced us performing, you have a different experience of the word juggler than your preconceived notion. So that would be post-experience, or in this case, post-transformation, for you to understand what is going on. And so to call something emotional freedom technique in post-transformational language, I mean, think about it. Before you knew anything about tapping, someone saying, you're going to thump on your face and your emotions are going to go away and you're going to be emotionally free. You can see in many circumstances how that might undercut the credibility of it. The second reason why I struggled with that name is I have never thought the goal of tapping was to be free of emotions. Emotions are not the enemy. For me, when I tap, the goal is to have a proportionate, well-informed emotional response. Let me say that again. And if you've been listening to the podcast for a while, you've heard me say this before. But the goal is to have a proportionate, well-informed emotional response. And so what that means is it's okay if I encounter a bear that I'm scared. It's okay if a loved one dies and I'm sad. It's okay if my internet is not working and it's impacting my day that I feel frustrated. But what we want to make sure is that the emotional response is proportional. Because if you think about the last week, you know when you've had a disproportionate emotional response or you've gotten a little over the edge, or to make sure that the emotion we're feeling is accurate to what is going on. You know, it's one thing for me to feel like I've been betrayed when it was just a miscommunication. Like, that's misinformed, and we need to sort that particular thing out. And so the goal is not to be free of emotions. Well, this is where my mind was changed. Rick made the comment about how when we use the tool, we have the freedom to have a conscious emotional experience versus falling into our old patterns of how we respond to things. And so in his mind, or the way he was using emotional freedom, is that we are not going into old patterns. And I find that as a really lovely way of thinking about emotional freedom. I'm still not super crazy about the name, and going forward, I typically almost always refer to it as tapping. But it really got me thinking about the goal of tapping again. And so I think, for me, it is important that when I sit down to tap, I have a goal in mind for the tapping. Because if I have a goal in mind for the tapping or an intention for my tapping session, I'm much more likely to get something out of it. I oftentimes think of tapping because of all of the things that are rattling around in my head that could use some transformation. I oftentimes think of tapping like going shopping at a giant outlet mall. For those of you outside of the United States, I don't know if you have this particular experience, but here in the United States, there are these huge malls where stores kind of have their stuff that is out of season, stuff that is going away. It's super, super discounted. And there are a number of them in the United States that are massive. I mean, they're just hundreds and hundreds and hundreds of thousands, if not millions and millions of square footage of just retail space. And if you walk into an outlet mall without a plan, you could wander around the outlet mall for 3 hours, end up with an armful of things in the front of your shirt covered with powdered sugar from a funnel cake that you don't even remember eating, and just kind of staggering to your car, not exactly sure what you bought. Because there's just so much in there, and it's so overwhelming, and it's so disorganized. Sounds like the inside of my head. But if you go into the outlet mall and you're like, I need a belt and 2 pairs of dress shoes to go with this brown suit that I just bought, you may or may not come out with what you wanted, but you're going to move through the mall with a sense of efficiency, and you're going to do what you need to do to find what you need, and your time is going to be more well managed. So I think when we're sitting down to tap, having an intention for what we are trying to do is going to make our tapping more efficient. And not that efficiency is the goal of everything, but I don't want to be in a circumstance where, like if I was building houses, I don't want 5 houses that are 20% built. Because if I have 5 houses that are 20% built, I can't move into any of them, I can't sell any of them. I actually have to complete something. And I think with tapping, it is really easy if we sit down without intention that I can spend 30 minutes tapping, I can spend 30 minutes working on my health and well-being, and that's a net positive. But I can end up with just kind of taking small little bits off of lots of issues that really don't impact my outcome and how I navigate my day. So by sitting down with some intention, I think it's going to make a really big difference in what you are going to get out of your tapping. Now, there are lots and lots of intentions that you have. I've broken them down into 5 categories. And as we talk about them, you're going to see that there's some overlap. And this is not a comprehensive list, but this is just a starting point. I would love to hear if you can think of another category that these would go into that make difference for us. Number 1 is emotional first aid. And I had a really great long conversation with John D. Whitus about emotional first aid. If you go back to episode 468, and that's just tappingqa.com/468, episode 468, and I'll include a link in the show notes, we had a really long conversation about emotional first aid. And emotional first aid is exactly that. Emotional first aid is about getting ourselves emotionally regulated in the moment. When you're scared, when you're overwhelmed, when you're desperate, oftentimes emotional first aid is something that we extend to someone else. You know, the number of times that I've sat next to really nervous flyers that I've been able to help them to calm down as they navigate the particular flight. And one of the things I loved about the conversation I had with John D is she even mentioned the fact that it wasn't even tapping. It was just emotional first aid, that we're doing whatever is in our tool set to be able to do that transformation and not being married to a particular protocol, but being in a place of trying to get relief. So when something extreme is happening in the moment for ourselves or someone else, we do some tapping, we do some emotional first aid. The second is very similar to the first, and it's probably a Venn diagram where they overlap. And that is what I would call regulating our resource state. And regulating our resource state is getting ourselves out of fight, flight, freeze, fog, flop. If you want to hear more about that, go back to episode 491, last week's episode, tappingqa.com/491. Where we're just trying to either we're making ourselves feel better, and maybe that is going from overwhelmed, tired, unfocused to calm, or we're actually installing a resource state where we're trying to build confidence or something like that. So we're regulating our resource state so that we are feeling better. One of the really simple ways that I do this is at the beginning of my day, when I sit down at my desk, is I take either 5 or 10 minutes, depending on the day, and I tap without any words. Like, I'm not tapping for a particular issue. I'm just tapping because I know it calms me down and it's going to make my day more efficient. I do the exact same thing oftentimes at the end of the day. Before I climb into bed, I'll take 5 minutes, just tap without words, knowing that by stimulating those tapping points, we're reducing the cortisol in the system and we just feel better. And so it can be as focused as, I would like to feel more confident, I'm changing my resource state, or it could be as general as, I'm just calming my system, so I'm more focused for the day, I'm more focused for the conversation I'm about to have, or I'm more relaxed before I go to bed. The third way that I really like tapping is when I'm trying to take an action. And I've talked about this ad nauseum, so I won't go in huge detail about how we do this in this particular episode. But the idea of recognizing that if I know what to do, I know how to do it, and I have the resources to do it, and I am not in a situation where I'm taking action, there is resistance to action somewhere, and tapping is the perfect opportunity to go after that. And when we're tapping for an action is we imagine the action, we uncover the issues, we do the tapping, we come back and reimagine the taking the action. And so basically the length of our tapping is till we're in a position where we can take the action that we want today. Because for me, oftentimes for some of the things I resist, I might tap on it multiple times, but I only need to tap on it and be clear enough to take the action today. And if I need to tap on it again tomorrow to take the action again tomorrow, that's great because I took the action today. The fourth thing that I think is really valuable about tapping, and this oftentimes happens accidentally, or not accidentally, but coincidentally when we're tapping, I find it really useful to have that intention, and that's to get clarity. Because oftentimes about the issue that we're struggling with, what we're experiencing is the emotion about the issue, not the issue itself. And what I mean by that is, yesterday I didn't do something, and I am angry because I didn't get the outcome I wanted, and I'm disappointed in myself because I know better and I should have just taken that action. And so the frustration and disappointment at myself for not taking the action is the emotion about the issue. And so if we are tapping and we are unclear, or we're tapping about one particular issue, but we know there's something deeper, tapping is going to peel away that layer and give us clarity. We talk a lot about wanting to be as specific as possible when we're tapping. And people often misread that as, I need to be specific in order to tap. And sometimes as specific as possible is, I am angry. And if I'm tapping on I'm angry, and I'm turning into the fire in my chest and my clenching fists, all of a sudden I go, oh, I'm angry because I feel like the people at my work are dismissing my contribution. And so when I have a really strong primary emotion, or I'm in a circumstance where I'm like, oh, this feels like something that is surfacey, tapping in addition to removing and reducing and getting a proportional sense of that emotion is going to give us clarity. If you've listened to the podcast for any length of time, you've heard me use this analogy before. It's kind of like looking into the backyard that's full of morning mist. And as the sun rises and then it warms up, the mist slowly burns away. And all of a sudden you can see the shed and the tree and the swing on the tree and the lock on the shed as they come more and more into clarity. And tapping is really valuable with that. And then number 5 on my short list here is clearing a specific trauma. That you are in a circumstance where you know an instance in your past, and that past could be 5 minutes ago, and that past could be 75 years ago. But there is this trauma from our past where we had an experience, where we experienced something extreme, isolating, and unexpected that created problems that are still stuck inside of the system, that tapping is a fabulous way to be able to go in and clear that out. So the 5 I have listed, and again, my list is short: emotional first aid, state regulation, taking action, getting clarity about issues, and working on trauma. And as you can see, oftentimes these are going to overlap. I might sit down to get some clarity and I incur trauma. I am sitting down to take action, and as I'm looking at the resistance to take action, I discover an underlying trauma. I am starting an emotional first aid, and as I feel a little better, I want to actually transform my resource state. As I'm doing my 10 minutes of tapping in the morning, I think of an action that I want to take, and then all of a sudden there's a tightness in my chest as I think about that action. So they're all integrated. But I think by having a plan when you sit down to tap and having an intention for what you're trying to achieve makes a huge, huge difference. Now, I would love to hear your reflections. What are some of the other intentions that you have when you sit down to tap? I would love to be able to update this list with other ideas and conversations. I can always be reached, Gene, Gene, at tappingqa.com. Or if you're listening to this on the website, you can just drop a comment down below in the comment section. I'd love to hear your experience and thought about these particular ideas. If you know someone in your life who could use a framework like this, a taxonomy to help them to be more successful with their tapping, please pass it along. Don't spam your inbox and send it to every single person in the world. But you might know one or two people who could really use something like this today, that this would enhance their transformation in their life. And even if you send them an email or you send them a text message with the link and they don't even click play, they don't even open it up, the fact that you've reached out and said, hey, in these wacky times, I'm thinking about you, this might make your day a little better, will make a real difference. Because I know when people reach out and send me resources saying they're thinking of me, it just makes my day so much better. If you haven't done so, I'd really encourage you to subscribe to the podcast. And podcasting parlance, subscribe is always free. All you need to do is search for Tapping Q&A everywhere you get audio. You can find it in Apple Podcasts, Google Podcast, Pandora, Spotify, Amazon Music, Audible, basically everywhere you find audio. Just search Tapping Q&A. Once you find it, click subscribe, click follow, turn on the notifications, whatever it is in the app of choice you listen on, so that every single time a new episode comes out, it's downloaded to your smart device. You get a notification so you don't miss the tapping goodness. If you have a question, if you have a comment, if you have something you'd like to add to my little taxonomy, always reach out. I love hearing from you. Some of our best episodes and interviews come from recommendations from listeners just like you. I can always be reached, Gene, Gene, at tappingqa.com. If you're on the website, click on the contact link. If you have downloaded the Tapping Q&A app, I can always be reached by clicking on the contact link inside of the app. You can send me an email or a voice memo from inside. If you haven't downloaded that app, it's absolutely free. For the Tapping Q&A podcast, this is Gene Montrestelli. I hope you have a great day, and I will talk to you real soon. Bye-bye. The Tapping Q&A podcast is copyright Gene Montrestelli Tapping Q&A. All views expressed by guests are those of the guests and not necessarily of Gene Montrestelli and Tapping Q&A.